America was already struggling due to the pandemic and its economic fallout. But after the death of George Floyd, the country has exploded. It doesn't help that this is an election year and Donald Trump is the president. This weekend, when America was burning, the president was in Cape Canaveral, complete with the song Macho Man playing in the background.
Thank you, everybody. So it is a go, they just announced, right? Yes, sir. It's a go.
This has become like a long, endless joke on America, and it's not funny anymore. Trump was witnessing the launch of the SpaceX flight to the International Space Station. From the NASA facility, he declared, "Mobs won't call the shots." He blamed what he called the radical left for the violence.
Radical left criminals, thugs, and others, all throughout our country and throughout the world, will not be allowed to set communities ablaze. We won't let it happen. It harms those who have the least, and we will be protecting those who have the least. The leadership of the National Guard and the Department of Justice are now in close communication with state and city officials in Minnesota, and we're coordinating our efforts with local law enforcement all across our nation. In America, justice is never achieved at the hands of an angry mob. I will not allow angry mobs to dominate. Won't happen.
Well, his warning did not douse the anger or dissuade the protesters. If anything, it made things worse. The crisis reached his doorstep, literally, right outside the White House. Protesters clashed with the Secret Service. These are officers who protect the president, now fighting ordinary Americans. 3 years in power, Donald Trump is facing his biggest tests, a pandemic and a protest. Also an election that will be a referendum on him. The president is beset with crises and he blames everyone but himself. On Friday, he called the protesters thugs. Then he tweeted, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." Not his original words. These are the words of a former Miami police chief in the 1960s. These are also words that spurred race riots in that decade. Trump saw nothing wrong in repeating them. On Saturday, he wanted to unleash, quote unquote, the most vicious dogs, the most ominous weapons on the protesters. These are the words of a president. He was talking about the crowd that had gathered outside the White House. When the threats did not work, Trump came up with a new enemy, something called the Antifa, short form of anti-fascist. Trump wants to declare them a terrorist organization, but there's a problem. This so-called group does not have a leader. It doesn't have a defined structure. It doesn't have any membership roles. It's more of a movement of activists who share similar philosophy and tactics. They're usually far left and anti-fascist. Can Donald Trump call them terrorists? Perhaps he can. He already has. Can he designate them terrorists? No. 2 reasons. One, it is impossible to know exactly how many people identify themselves as part of the Antifa. And 2, the United States does not have a domestic terrorism law. What exists right now applies to foreign entities, not to domestic groups. So think again. Nonetheless, the president has made the pronouncements on Twitter, his favorite social media platform that calls out his fake news. Donald Trump's tweets are fanning this fire. According to a report, Trump's own advisors are worried about it. They say the tweets, and I'm quoting again, are pouring fuel on an already incendiary situation. The opposition has latched onto this. Joe Biden, whose nomination as the Democratic candidate for president now just remains a formality, is taking on President Trump.
You know, this is no time for incendiary tweets. It's no time to encourage violence. This is a national crisis. We need real leadership right now. Leadership that will bring everyone to the table so we can take measures to root out systemic racism. It's time for us to take a hard look at the uncomfortable truths. It's time for us to face that deep, open wound we have in this nation. We need justice for George Floyd. We need real police reform.
To be fair, racism is not something that Donald Trump introduced. It was a problem that subsequent governments, both Republican and Democrat, brushed under the carpet. Trump may have exacerbated it and is now falling woefully short in fighting the fire. And one of the many presidents who failed in curbing racism and racial tension is Barack Obama. He was the 44th president of America. He was the country's first black president. And he is the latest to jump into this controversy. Obama has tweeted his thoughts on the riots. He calls it the quote-unquote real turning point to bring about real change, which is ironic. It was his inauguration that was viewed as the real turning point in the American society. Barack Obama was elected to the White House in 2009. Back then, he said racism was a real issue. But President Obama was all talk. Severe policing of black neighborhoods continued. Under the Obama administration, at least 6,000 blacks died of homicides every year. What's worse, the percentage of Americans who believed that racism was on the rise doubled with Obama as president. 2 presidential terms later, Barack Obama says, and I quote again, "It's going to be up to a new generation of activists to shape strategies that best fit the times." It was under his term that a black teenager was shot. The officer who shot Michael Brown was not indicted. What exactly was Obama's strategy to battle racism in 2014? The African American community saw Obama's election as a ray of hope. He failed to deliver.